In this lesson, we're going to create a matte for our reflection using our head geometry and our reflection geometry on a new render layer. So here we are inside of mine. I've just opened up 09 Begin. So let's go to our reflection layer, or our render layer, and let's just right-click and duplicate this layer. Or I believe it's copy layer. And in this new one, let's call this our reflection matte. So at the end of the last lesson, if we jump to our side view, we can see that half of our head is in front of the reflection and therefore should have no reflections on it, and half is behind the glass and should have reflections. But our reflection layer currently does not know that, and so our reflection layer is just going to render the entire reflection, as we can see here. So to save us time in our compositing phase, what we can do is create a cutout for our reflection layer. So let's select our head geometry. So I'm just going to select the head group, jump over to our reflection matte, add in that head group, and let's also add in our cutout here. So right click, add selected objects. And we might also need to Control Shift H or Shift H to unhide those objects. Now we need a matte that tells us what is in front of this reflection layer and what is behind it. So to do that, I'm going to set this reflection layer and our cutout matte to that black cutout material. So let's go right click, assign existing material, and let's go to our cutout black, which will remove everything behind our reflection. So now when we hit render, we should be able to see exactly what is in front of our matte and what is behind it, or what is in front of our reflection and what is behind it. Now, we're not going to be worrying about the color channels. We're only going to be worrying about the alpha channel. So here we can see everything that is in front of our matte. So if we do an inverse matting, or if we reverse this alpha and use it on our reflection, we will now have the correct matte for our reflections. And this is all going to be a lot easier to see once we finally get into the compositing phase. So now that we have our reflection matte set, let's now come in and do our final render setup. So let's go to our camera here and let's turn off our image plane because we no longer need to see this. So let's just say display mode none. Now let's go into our render setup here, and we're going to need to change a few things. So let's see, we already have our sampling at 2. We already have our frame buffer at floating point. We already have all of our overrides turned on, and we have an ambient occlusion layer as well. So let me actually, okay, that's correctly set. All right, and we're rendering out all 4 of these layers here. So let's now go to our Common tab, and let's set up our file name prefix. So we want to make sure to have the render layer in there, and let's give this a, let's say, picture frame 3D, and then render layer. And let's give this an OpenEXR format so we have the full color range, and then name.number.extension. We have a 55 frame sequence, and we want to make sure our renderable camera is set to the camera we exported from MatchMover. And then we of course want to render at the correct size according to whatever our initial frame size was. Okay, so now I believe we have, or we're ready to hit the batch render button. Let's do one last check. We've got a depth pass and a matte pass coming out of our matte layer. Just give ourselves one more test render here to make sure our alpha and our color pass is going to be coming out as we expect. I find that I'm often double checking myself before hitting the render button because nothing is more expensive than hitting the render button and something going wrong. So spending a few minutes to double check your settings and double check that everything is coming out as you expect it is well worth the cost. Okay, so our color layer looks good. Our alpha channel looks good for our master layer. Let's double check our occlusion settings here. Okay, and we're going for a rather subtle occlusion with the white as the dark areas. All right, looking good. Let's check our reflection layer. Again, I'm not really expecting anything to go wrong at this point, but it never really hurts to check. And so this reflection is also going to be our alpha for the picture frame. which is going to help us out quite a lot. And finally, our reflection matte layer, which again is going to help us cut out this reflection to be correctly composited with our person's face. And again, we're only looking at the alpha channel here. Okay, everything looks good. So now we can jump up to our render menu and go to render, batch render. And these frames will take a little while to render out as we're doing pretty generally good settings on our master layer, although we are using Final Gather mapping to speed that up a little bit. So as soon as these are done rendering, we're going to stop using Maya and jump into our compositing application to finish out this shot.